Hello, it's Thursday, 23rd of September 2021. Today I'm going to talk about David Bowie's fifth album, The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars, released in June 1972. A lot of people rate this album very, very highly. I'm one of them, by the way. Some of the other ones where I've talked about the earlier David Bowie albums, The Man Who Sold the World, for example, and the DRAM and the David Bowie self-titled albums, I've been perhaps a little less engaged because I think David was becoming himself over time. Whereas this album is the first classic chronologically in his career. We think this is a man that's really, fully engaged, and not only fully engaged but fully adept. Really reached a level of fluency in his ability to write songs, to construct songs, to come up with ideas, present images, and everything else that goes with it. It's almost like a fully formed package here. So, to some respects, this is the debut album by Ziggy Stardust and not a David Bowie album, if that makes sense. David had adopted the persona of a rock star called Ziggy Stardust, who was kind of intercepting transmissions from aliens and UFOs and ideas from other planets and other galaxies, and then kind of transforming them. Let's start again. Put my teeth in my mouth. Transforming them into something as basic and as vulgar as a rock song, and somehow he's managed to make an absolutely brilliant LP. Here it is, an absolute classic. Go buy, listen, enjoy, love it. But I want to talk about what happened in the lead up to this. As you'll see from Space Oddity, David was quite influenced by science fiction. I think he was reading authors like William Burroughs, for example. He was quite open about that. He also obviously had seen 2001: A Space Odyssey, and undoubtedly went to the cinema and saw films of a similar ilk. Now, 1971, this album was recorded between November and February. November 1971, February 1972. And I'm going to talk about some of the things which were floating around in popular culture at the time that you may or may not be aware of. We have in 1971, we have this, The Omega Man, starring Charlton Heston, The Last Man Alive, the filmed adaptation of I Am Legend, later remade as I Am Legend with Will Smith. We had this, THX 1138 by George Lucas, his first movie, a very dystopian science fiction about mankind being oppressed and crushed and having to live in a different world. The world was full of dystopian science fiction, largely bankrolled and influenced, I think, by 2001. Obviously, you had the Planets of the Apes movies. You had the Andromeda Strain, which came out in, I think, 1971 as well, around some kind of space virus, and they were working on making this classic Soylent Green. Soylent Green is people. Sorry to break the film for you. I haven't seen this for a very long time. I probably should do. But this is the kind of stuff that was on television. It was in the theatres. It was in the cinemas. Philip K. Dick has undoubtedly been brought to David's attention. William Burroughs was writing things like Naked Lunch. It was all out there, and I think he was taking influence from science fiction and putting that into the pop music format, and casting himself as an alien in human form, which obviously is shown here in Ziggy Stardust, but also on the cover to Aladdin Sane, where we've got the lightning flash bolts, which I'll talk about when I talk about the Aladdin Sane album. Really, science fiction has very much portrayed that mankind was coming to an end. It was the end of the world. The science fiction narrative was that everything was downhill from here. There was oppression, probably food shortages, energy shortages, water riots, and probably brain control and lasers and everything like that. And then when you think about the opening lines to Starman, where he sings about there's a man from the stars that's come to sing a song to us, and everything that goes with that, you kind of think, okay, so what we've got is we've actually got a concept LP where David Bowie is playing the role of a rock star and adopting a very clearly not human name and kind of image to present himself. It's also an album where he was blurring the lines around his identity and around his sexuality. He said that he was gay, he said that he was bisexual, said that he was probably omnisexual in all those things. So there was an element of kind of, and rock and roll, by its very kind of nature is quite an adolescent genre. It's a genre where if you get into music, you don't get into music when you're 34, you get into music when you're 13, 14. You're sat in your bedroom, and the people that are writing the songs, those songs are speaking to you, they're explaining to you, they're providing you maps through reality, and what may appear to be a quickly tossed off lyric actually becomes really, really important. You go, now I understand, I can see the world in a different way, I feel so extraordinary. You know, it's a wonderful thing actually to be a 13 or 14-year-old and just have all of music kind of opening up in front of you and going, I'm going to have a bit of that, I'm going to have a bit of that, I'm going to have a bit of that, and you have all of it. And in 1972, as mentioned in my previous episode, David was still working on the concept of perhaps not only being an artist in his own right, but adopting other personas and presenting them. Hence the Arnold Corns here, the 12-inch single I showed you last time round, which had primitive versions of Hang On To Yourself and also Man in the Middle and Looking For A Friend, under the name the Arnold Corns. David had also adopted the concept that perhaps he could be a Svengali, he could help bring other artists to popular culture. And so in 1972 he produced this album, Transformer by Lou Reed, largely regarded as a classic by Lou Reed, one of his first post-Velvet Underground albums. Velvet Underground obviously being very influential, and to quote Brian Eno, they didn't sell that many records, but every record they sold helped form a band. So that's kind of Transformer, which was produced by David and Mick Ronson, play on the album, do backing vocals. It's an integral part of the David Bowie story. And if you look at the songs that are on Transformer, I haven't done this, by the way, I haven't checked this or rehearsed this. The songs on the album include Walk on the Wild Side, Perfect Day, Satellite of Love. If you're going to say, well, what are the three big Lou Reed songs? Well, you go, well, Walk on the Wild Side, Perfect Day, and Satellite of Love. So this is probably, in many people's eyes, the best Lou Reed album. Obviously, anybody that's heard the collaboration album between Lou Reed and Metallica, Lulu, will know that that is most definitely not the best David Bowie album. But at this point, David had produced this album. He was starting to mould himself as a bit of a star maker in the UK, although wasn't that good. That's it. Wasn't that good, I'm afraid to say. He also, of course, was working with another band. You may have heard of this band. Incredible band. And I'm going to try and see if I can take this one out of its sleeve. This is an original 1973 copy of Iggy and the Stooges' Raw Power. This is one of the best rock albums of all time. It's an incredible album. I got to see Iggy and the Stooges play it live at the Hammersmith Odeon, the very same room where David played his last show as the Spiders from Mars. And I saw it played live in 2010, and I got to tell you, live Stooges, incredible, absolutely incredible. The record is pretty good too. Cliche has it that nobody was particularly satisfied with this album. Technically, it was produced by Iggy Pop, and it was mixed by David Bowie. Although I kind of think that actually producing it by Iggy Pop for Main Man, and it being a Main Man production, Main Man being the management group that David Bowie had clearly kind of pushed his talents towards, this is almost definitely produced by David Bowie, even if it doesn't officially say so on there, although it is mixed by him. Raw Power is one of the best rock albums of all time. I will fight you if you disagree with me on this. It sounds incredible, like a jet engine, kind of roared and playing exactly in tune. There's nothing quite like it. It comes in a number of mixes, by the way, Raw Power. There's the original 1973 David Bowie mix. Some people don't like that. There is this version, which was produced and mixed by Iggy Pop and remixed in 1997. This is not a great mix of the album. It's all in the red, it's bumped up to the top, and it's not particularly good, actually, to be honest. The CD version of Raw Power from 1997, Iggy's just hit all the faders and pushed everything up. There is a reissue of Raw Power, which came out, I think, in 2010. Here it is, double disc version of it, which features the I think the David Bowie mix is on this, and also then there's a live set from Atlanta, Georgia, October 1973. I've got to tell you, if you want to get the David Bowie mix of Raw Power on CD, this is the version to get. The reissue from 2010. what an album. I absolutely love it. If nothing else, it proves that, you know, David had great taste in bands, and they're also around about this time. The Stooges also recorded a heck of a lot of extra material, which I suppose I should probably do an episode about, actually, because their discography is complicated and huge. They've made not very many songs go a very, very, very long way indeed. But you can't understate David's influence on the world around him, producing the Stooges, producing David Bowie, producing Iggy Pop, and obviously writing, recording, and releasing Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. So let's talk about the LP. At this point, David was still a one-hit wonder. He was that guy from the 60s that did Space Oddity, that had been a hit, and nothing else had really happened since then. This is the one where everything changed for him because of the single Starman. Here is the RCA one, which features The Sound of Music. RCA Records, available on stereo 8-track cartridge tapes and cassettes, by the way, in case you're ever interested in a dead format. This is an original 1972 copy of Starman. Putting it technically, it's beat up to shit. The stories it could tell us are quite something. And this one, by the way, belonged to Carol Taylor. As I've mentioned before, people did used to put their names on records when they took records to parties to make sure that nobody stole them. Carol could go, "This is my record, it's got my name written on it. Sorry, Carol, it's mine now, and nobody else is getting it." Also, the 7-inch sleeve there has Carol Taylor written on it. Everybody did this. Property of Carol Taylor, £1. Oh, no, £9 Avenue, Stevenage, Hertfordshire. Thank you, Carol, for your sacrifice and for going off the records as you grow older. To me, a record collection is not just for Christmas, it's for life. But for Carol, clearly she grew out of it. Probably bought it on CD instead. This is the Starman single. This changed David Bowie's life. It changed a lot of people's lives. It's backed with Suffragette City, both from the album Ziggy Stardust. And this song was reissued in 2016 with a remix, a pointless remix that's probably a copyright extension remix, to be honest. The worst kind of remix that there is to breathe a bit of extra life into the David Bowie catalogue. The Top of the Pops appearance that David made for Starman really, I think, was the first time that David appeared in his current format. That's the kind of outfit that he was wearing when he appeared on Top of the Pops. This, by the way, is the Moon Age Daydream book, which I mentioned to you previously. Text by David Bowie, photographs by Mick Rock between about 1971 and 1972. It really showed his, you know, the way that he just didn't look like anybody else, didn't act like anyone else. Even his clothes, which had been handmade and chosen, he looked like he was an alien, parachuted in from another planet that was somehow in a human form. It's no wonder, really, that The Man Who Fell to Earth, his first major film appearance, was about him playing an alien. Now, when I saw the David Bowie Is exhibition, and the last time I saw it was in Barcelona, it was really strange to see, you know, the video footage which there had changed so many people's lives. That moment where he points and does that thing to the camera, I think that's during a performance of Starman on Top of the Pops. It happened before I was born, I should point out. Is that it's just weird to see that item and to think that that particular piece of clothing, that action, that moment was the moment where suddenly people thought that he was, you know, reaching through the television to talk to you himself. And to give you an idea of what he was wearing on the day, that's these are pages from the David Bowie Is catalogue, and my God, what a fantastic and unusual. I mean, that thing looks like it comes from another planet now, and we are 48 years after the fact. And somehow he was, despite all of the things, he was himself, but he was everybody else at the same time. And everyone was able to project onto him the things that they saw and that they felt. So Starman, backed with Suffragette City, this might not be the original single, it might be a reissue actually, changed lives. And it's a song about, you know, a starman that's come to tell us about the world and his view therefore of it. So let's talk about the album. There's a couple of reissues and things and bits and bobs that we need to get to, but let's talk about Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars, the rise and fall thereof. This is an RCA international version. It says on here, made in Canada, 1972. This also, by the way, contains the instruction that it's to be played at maximum volume. If you look at the back of Cure LPs, you will also see a very similar instruction that the music has been mixed to be played loud, so turn it up, or to be played at maximum volume. Robert Smith is known for being a fan of David Bowie. I suspect he may have stolen it from there. Talent borrows and genius steals, to quote Oscar Wilde. This is an original LP from 1972. It is, manufactured in Canada, and it's got French labels, which is bizarre, but so be it. The important thing is that I have it. I don't know why I'm telling you that, but there you are. The album opens with the track 5 Years. And that opens with David Bowie telling us that the Earth is really dying. 5 years is all that we've got. Now, bearing in mind, I've mentioned to you before, things like the Andromeda Strain and THX 1138 and the Omega Man. Popular culture was full of messages around the end of the universe, the end of mankind, the fall of mankind, the last days of Rome. And here we are. Ziggy Stardust is fiddling whilst home burns. It's an important song. It's also, of course, coming very, very handy if you ever wanted to do a retrospective documentary about 5 years of David Bowie's life, or you wanted to do a box set about 5 years of David Bowie's life, or you wanted to appear in some kind of TV show like Life on Mars or Ashes to Ashes, where 5 years is all that you've got. And I remember watching the end of one of those shows, and they played 5 years, and my partner said, "Is that David Bowie?" And has he written? I was like, "No, that's a song from 1972. They've made the song fit the moment." And 5 years is, I think, probably the opening salvo in the album's narrative construction, basically saying mankind is fucked. You got 5 years, that's your lot, and that's all there is. What are you going to do with that time? What are you going to do with your life? And it ties in with the science fiction themes that also appear in Diamond Dogs, for example, and later on, perhaps less successfully, the Glass Spider Tour and the Glass Spider and the Never Let Me Down again. Never Let Me Down album, which is in my bottom rung of David Bowie LPs, by the way. The 5 years is just this brilliantly beautiful song, and it kind of exists inside and outside of time. It can be, you can listen to it now. It sounds like it was recorded yesterday. The production is absolutely immaculate, and the message, 5 years, that's all we've got. You can look at things in the light of COVID and go, yeah, we've only got 5 years. COVID's really done a thing on us. Is mankind running out of time? The news articles around, for example, the way in which the climate is going to change over the next few years do indicate that perhaps mankind is on the decline, or as Neil Tennant used to put it, going down the dumper. 5 years might be all that we've got. Nobody can really predict where we're going to be. For example, if you said to me in September 2016 that in September 2021 we'd have gone through Trump being president, COVID, Brexit, all those things, I would have been like, that's an awful lot of stuff to happen in the next few years. Are you sure that's really going to happen? I'm going, oh yeah, by the way, global pandemic and attempted insurrection in America. I'd be like, not convinced. I don't think that's quite going to happen. Well, sometimes it's good to be wrong. Sometimes it's not good. I'd rather be right than wrong, and I was wrong in that respect. Track 2 on the LP is Soul Love, and Soul Love is just wonderful. It's very difficult to explain what it is. What it does do, by the way, it features David Bowie on saxophone. Hardly anybody talks about David Bowie on saxophone. He could play it. He was really, really good at it. He never really talked about it too much. But for example, keyboards, guitar, all those songs, that voice, and as well, that most rock and roll of instruments, the saxophone, as Homer Simpson had it. And the saxophone on Soul Love kind of drifts in and out of the song, and it plays through it. But people don't really remember that it's there, actually, which is, when you listen to it out for the saxophone. And then, of course, track 3 is Moon Age Daydream. We will be familiar with Moon Age Daydream from the previous single by the Arnold Corns, but here it's been completely re-recorded, rethought, remixed, rearranged with extra piano, and it sounds like a better, fuller song. It's a fantastic song, and it's also a song which was released in 1996 on the B-side of one of the singles from the Outside era. David released a number of live recordings of songs from his early 70s. He released a version of Age Daydream recorded live, and also a version of Man Who Sold the World, and made them sound like contemporary songs that had just been recorded. A great skill actually is to make a song that's both in and out of time. It's very specifically 1972, but the elements of 1972 could apply to 2022 or any other year. Actually, pretty sure they're going to announce a 50th anniversary set of this next year with a whole bunch of new remixes and demos that you've previously never heard on a series of bizarre and unusual box sets. Track 4, Starman, 4 minutes 10 seconds that changed the world. At this point, Bowie was still a one-hit wonder. He's still the geezer that had done Space Oddity, and he's talking about the alien voice on the radio speaking to the few. It's almost a thematic sequel to Space Oddity in that respect, is that Major Tom is out in outer space and he's hearing an alien voice, and somehow he then becomes Ziggy Stardust and then goes off to make an album and communicate through the art of popular song like a religious cult, probably inspired a little bit by things like Charlie Manson actually, and the idea that you could use music to change people's lives and come down from the stars to do that. Sadly, the next song on the album is It Ain't Easy, which is a cover version. And it's not as if David was short of songs. I don't quite know why he chose the cover version to go on there. It Ain't Easy. It's not very good. I hate to break it to you guys, but you probably know that. It's not very good at all. Now, in ye olde days, flip the album over to side 2. Here is David Bowie inside a phone box. One could argue that he's inside a phone box because there's a kind of like a vague link to Doctor Who. Doctor Who travels in a TARDIS, time and relative dimensions in space, which is also a phone box, and in a neat kind of squaring the circle off. One of David's chroniclers, Nicholas Pegg, apparently used to operate a Dalek during the filming of Doctor Who, so everything comes around in the end. But there's a reason he is there in the telephone box, and I think there's a bit of Doctor Who in this as well. It's very sly, it's very subtle, it's very cheeky actually, in fact. And where this album cover was shot on the front, that sign apparently was binned and somebody stole it. There is now a plaque to commemorate the site where this album cover was shot in London. It certainly doesn't look like that anymore. Flipping the album over to side 2, we've got Lady Stardust, which was originally, I think, performed under the title Song for Mark, and written for and inspired by, and probably a hopeless pastiche of Mark Bolan. And it's a great song. But what it is this album is a combination. It's a sum of the parts. So the parts on their own, some of them absolutely fantastic. Some of them, like It Ain't Easy, not so amazing. But you put everything together and it creates something that's bigger and better and brighter and wider and harder and faster and stronger and always better. You've got Star there. A song about being a rock and roll star. Now, the musical style that we've got in Star, by the way, it feels almost like it's a track for a stage musical. It feels a little bit like it could be the opening number to some kind of Andrew Lloyd Webber. But obviously Andrew Lloyd Webber is absolutely terrible, and his stuff goes on for years and years and years. It's awful, and I don't understand it at all. But there's a kind of music hall pastiche element to Star that feels like it could be in a musical. Could be the opening number to a stage production of Ziggy Stardust, about a rock and roll star that then becomes, communes with aliens and changes the universe. And you could probably do that actually. And if anybody wants to do that, you'll have to get my permission to launch the David Bowie musical, Ziggy Stardust. And by the way, in 2002, David did say that he was thinking about revisiting the songs, writing some extra ones, and putting a stage production together. But he never got any further than that, and he never talked about it in much detail. And breathe. I do go quite fast. I should go a little slower, a little calmer. Just stop, relax, everything's cool. So, side 2 of an album normally has a lag towards the end. Even on an 11-song album like this, the middle of side 2 is where you think you're going to be dumping some of your worst songs because people will stop paying attention, but then you load it up at the front. The band Big Black used to sequence their albums by their preference for the songs, which means the album got worse and worse as it went along. This is not the case for the rise and fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. Side 2 is one of the best side 2s of any album ever, because you've got Star, you've got Hang On To Yourself, which, by the way, obviously is completely different beats to the Arnold Corns version. We completely revamped. There's a new riff that runs through it. It's got this dynamic, faster tempo. The version that's on the single, I'll put it somewhere, I can't remember where it is. The Arnold Corns single is a little bit ropey, a little bit hazy, not particularly good. This version, no, not very good. This version, great, much better. What it really shows is even if you do write a song, the genius comes into the arrangements and the production and the structure of it. And as we talk about, I'll talk about other bands, specifically actually Depeche Mode, which I'm talking about at the moment. Is you listen to the changes that you've got in the production and the layering and the construction of the song makes a song from good to great. If you play Blue Monday, for example, on an acoustic guitar, you'd be like, it's all right, isn't it? It's not great. But then all of a sudden, if you put the 12-inch of Blue Monday on and you've got that fantastic thumping drum rhythm, that weird and unusual synthesizer, that kind of mixture of human and mechanical man-machine kind of sound, and suddenly go, this music sounds like it's from the future. Of course, 1983, it was from the future, and Ziggy Stardust sounds a little bit like a record that's been beamed back in time to 1972 from some non-specific point in the future where aliens and humans share cultural touch points. So Hang On To Yourself is absolutely great. It was played very, very frequently by David all the way through to his last tour. And then there's the track Ziggy Stardust, which, strange thing is, I don't think Ziggy Stardust was ever a single as such. It's become a single in retrospect, in much the same way that songs like Changes was never a hit. But it's become a big David Bowie song because it's been on the greatest hits albums. So sometimes, actually, how many copies of the 7-inch that you sell doesn't count for anything. You know, if you think about bands like Led Zeppelin, I think they released one single in the UK in their lifetime, and yet people go, oh yeah, Whole Lotta Love, Stairway to Heaven, Rock and Roll. Those were album tracks at the time. Those were not singles. In the UK, at the very least, I think maybe was it Immigrant Song was a single backed with the non-album track Hey Hey What Can I Do, but everything else album track that just got turned into a single kind of by mistake because radio would play them. So Ziggy Stardust, it's kind of a post-modern view of what it is to be a rock star, picking up with the theme that we've got right at the start of the album, 5 years and Starman and Star. There's very much a lot of material about the gap between a human being and a rock star, and the way that people look at rock stars and think of them as aliens. A really interesting kind of approach that we've got there. It's a detached kind of step back, which ties in with the lyrics that we've got in The Man Who Sold the World, where he talks about, I met a man upon the stairs who gazed a gazely stare and spoke like he wasn't there, or wasn't where. And with Ziggy, he's kind of almost stepping back from himself, going, I'm playing a role of a rock star called Ziggy Stardust. Ziggy playing guitar, I'm talking about myself in the third person, in the same way that when you meet somebody, you introduce yourself and you go, hi, I'm Mark, or I'm this, where really what you think, well, I'm me. Mark's just the name that people use in order to describe who I am when talking to other people. You know, I could be called Moon Unit or Dweezil or Zowie or whatever the demarcation is. And in here, he's kind of talking about himself in the third person, going, I, David Bowie, I'm not the guy. I'm playing a role of someone called David Bowie, who's playing the role of somebody called Ziggy Stardust. And then that kind of ties in with some of the other songs that we've got on the album. There's a really great lyrical conceit in this that also ties in with his love of science fiction, and at the same point points back to the Space Oddity album. There's 2 more songs to go. Suffragette City, Hey Man, which was originally offered to Mott the Hoople, actually, and Ian Hunter thought it wasn't particularly good. So David then wrote all the young dudes. And it's got Suffragette City has got a really strange lyric, and I think the lyric is kind of touches upon slang and the imaginary language that's used in A Clockwork Orange, the Stanley Kubrick film and the Anthony Burgess book, which is called Nadsat, where you kind of biddy the schlockies of the the old it out or whatever. It's both a kind of timeless callback to the use of language and slang, but at the same point it's also going, this is an alien world, you're too old for it, Grandad, you don't understand what we're talking, biddy well brother, that type of stuff. And it was released as a single, Suffragette City, in 1976, when David Bowie's first hits album, Changes One, was released. And the last track on the album is Rock and Roll Suicide. Rock and Roll Suicide is incredibly influential. If you haven't heard Rock and Roll Suicide, you've heard the songs it's influenced. I Know It's Gonna Happen Someday by Morrissey. The ending of that track is a complete pastiche of Rock and Roll Suicide. Carter USM's track, I think, Falling on a Bruise, the ending of that is again hugely influenced by the ending of Rock and Roll Suicide. That kind of endlessly extending, huge kind of revolving chorus, which kind of climaxes and then comes to a slow sputter. Rock and Roll Suicide, by the way, also seems to me at least to be hugely influenced by some of the music hall material that David Bowie was very familiar with. So he was also very familiar with Jack Brel. He sang Port of Alabama. He sang Amsterdam. He's very familiar with that kind of music hall tradition. And in fact, Rock and Roll Suicide was released in 1976 as a single. I don't understand. I thought maybe 1974, backed by Quicksand, primarily because the record company RCA thought they could make some money out of it, because they thought they could make some money out of absolutely everything. All of Bowie's singles at this time in history were released largely out of sequence whenever the record company felt like maybe we can squeeze another track off a 4-year-old album and get a hit single. Which means that, for example, Drive-In Saturday, which is from the album Aladdin Sane and subtitled Seattle and Phoenix, because that's where it was recorded. Drive-In Saturday is actually backed with a cover of Chuck Berry's Round and Round, not the New Order song. And Round was recorded during the Ziggy Stardust sessions, but it was later bumped off the LP in the favour of, I think, another track, Starman, actually, because the theory was in 1972, and this was a thing that the Beatles followed, is that every single that you released was a new song. If it had been on the album, you didn't release it as a single. That felt to be crass and exploitative. Singles were separate things to albums. So when Starman came out as a single, and it was only because the American label felt that Starman was a great track that should be on the LP, Starman was stuck onto the Ziggy Stardust LP, and Round was bumped off. So I'd like to thank the American record label for having the good grace and taste to make the album much better by including Starman on it. And there was another track that was recorded during the same period, a song that you will undoubtedly have heard of. It's called Velvet Goldmine. Velvet Goldmine, which also lends its name to a terrible film from the 90s. Velvet Goldmine was the second B-side on the 1975 reissue of Space Oddity. And the B-sides of Space Oddity were Changes, which wasn't a hit, and Velvet Goldmine, which for some reason had never been released before. So you had like a 7-minute 7-inch, and it played at 45. And if you had one of those record players that automatically switched off as it came to the end, I guarantee you never heard the end of Velvet Goldmine. There was another single that was recorded in 1972, and it was also, David wasn't necessarily satisfied with the single version of it. He went in and recorded it again in 1975. That is John, I'm Only Dancing. Here's a 7-inch from 1975. 1979, with the 1972 version, which was recorded in the run-up to the album, Ziggy Stardust on here, and the 1975 version recorded during the Young American sessions there. Here is the 12-inch, one of David's very first 12 inches actually, is the John, I'm Only Dancing from the Young American sessions, and on side 1, there it is, and then side 2 was the version recorded during the Ziggy Stardust sessions here. Of course, take a photograph that's not on neither period and stick it onto a 12-inch, even though the 12-inch is just a really very, very big 7-inch at that point in history. Fascinating period. So, very, very busy. We haven't even got to the reissues yet. So, the first reissue, the 1990 Rykodisc Sound and Vision period. Yes, I know this sticker says it's 24-bit mastered from the 1999 era, but I kept the cases. This is the Rykodisc version, and the Rykodisc version contains 5 mostly previously unreleased songs, CD debuts, for a new mix of John I'm Only Dancing from 1972, Velvet Goldmine, which we've already discussed, a new track called Sweethead that had barely been rumoured to exist, and Sweethead has some well dodgy lyrics that are quite sexual. There's an element of potential sexism and racism and other horrible things in there. I could say it's a product of its time, but it's not aged well, which might be why it's kind of forgotten by lots of people now. There's also the demos of Ziggy Stardust and Lady Stardust on there. So the 1990 editions, if you're going to get one copy of Ziggy Stardust on CD, this is the one to get. There was also a compilation album released in 1998 called Rarest One Bowie, which features the demo of All the Young Dudes from 1973 and a number of recordings from the Carnegie Hall and Santa Monica, Ziggy Stardust, My Death, Hang On To Yourself, lots of stuff from Santa Monica, which kind of implicates that Santa Monica was a very, very popular unofficial release or a bootleg release. There was also, I think this might be the only version of Ziggy Stardust that was released as a single. There was a 3-track CD single of Ziggy Stardust from 1994, recorded live and taken from the forthcoming album Santa Monica. And in 2008, the Santa Monica radio broadcast finally got an official release, touched by the hand of David Bowie himself, and presented with sleeve notes, and the first one of the major archive releases that we had. This is a photograph of the original Scotch recording tape that was used for the radio broadcast, and this one has some photographs and some explanatory text, and it feels like basically an official bootleg. But David Bowie, Santa Monica, 1972, the first officially released full-length David Bowie concert recording. And in 2003, we got the Ziggy Stardust double CD set. Now, there's a number of versions of this. There was also a 5.1 mix that was remixed, I think it's Ken Scott, which was only available on DVD. Sadly, this one's pretty difficult to get hold of, and my copy's pretty beat up, actually, this. It features the album itself, all 11 tracks, in a sleeve with some photographs that are taken from the Mick Rock book, and some which aren't, and some photographs and discs, photos, and blah 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 blah. But also an advert for the Moon Age Daydream release. The second CD of this, by the way, and this is where this version really is worth getting. The second CD of it has the Arnold Corns version of Moon Age Daydream and Hang On To Yourself, the demo of Lady Stardust and Ziggy Stardust, which was on the Rykodisc version, John I'm Only Dancing, Velvet Goldmine, Holy Holy, Amsterdam, the Jack Brel song, the Supermen, Round and Round, that B-side which I mentioned earlier, a version of Sweethead, and a new mix of Moon Age Daydream. Now, that is not all. There is more to come. And what that reminds me is I've actually forgotten to get a CD. Back in a moment. And I'm back in the room. There's David Bowie at the Beeb, the best of 1968 to 1972. And this features a number of recordings from the same period as the Ziggy Stardust album. So, for example, radio session versions of Ziggy Stardust, Starman, Space Oddity, Changes, Oh You Pretty Things, Lady Stardust, Rock and Roll Suicides. This is a good compilation to get. It's like having an essential set of alternate studio recordings of Bowie from this period. However, it only goes up to 1972 in terms of an official release, unless you get the very first edition, which has the live in 2001. And then the last version that there currently is on the 5 years box set. The 5 years box set, as I've talked about before, this is a compendium of near enough of all the official stuff that was released at the time or had the words David Bowie written on the cover, plus an extra bit of box set bait. And what we've got on here is we've got two versions of the Ziggy Stardust album with two very slightly different photographs on. So we've got this version here, which contains the original LP in a vinyl reproduction sleeve, and that's to be played at maximum volume. We've also got an alternate presentation of the album. This is a stereo down mix of the I think the Ken Scott remix from 2003, and so this is the stereo version of the 5.1 mix that was on the DVD that was released in 2003. As a remix of the album, it features the album itself. I can barely tell the difference between this mix and that mix. Anyone would think that this version was released to create a bit of box set bait to make you go and buy the box set. I, of course, am not cynical for one so young, but it does contain an alternate mix of the album, might contain some alternate performances. To be honest, I don't particularly care. You've got a slightly different photograph on there, and again, if you look at the back, slightly different photograph again. David is not inside his TARDIS phone box. But what it does do is, if you want to go, wow, I've been listening to this album for a very, very long period of time, I want to hear something that's a little bit different, well, they have got the box set for you. 5 years, the box set, well worth getting, but not always easy to find now. Hopefully it'll be repressed at some point, and of course there's the recall disc which is in here, which contains all the singles, A's and B's from the time. That is the Ziggy Stardust album. I think it's a really good album. I love it, and it's the first one where chronologically I'm like, to quote that Leonardo DiCaprio thing, is you've got to have my curiosity. When I heard this, David had my attention. It's a great album. I love it, and it's all gold from here. Well, almost. I do have to talk about the Tonight album, which isn't particularly good at some point. I will be excoriating when I do that, and you might need to call some kind of medical assistance if you were David Bowie's career. But he felt much the same thing, because in 1989 we had Tin Machine, who, by the way, I absolutely love. I don't care who knows it. That is Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars, the 1972 album by David Bowie. It's a great album. I'm really glad I've got it in my life. I've had many, many hours of pleasure listening to this, and I'll have many more. I'm probably going to be listening to this at the age of 80, going, I'm still finding new things in it. God, I never thought about that. And that's what great art is. Great art is the lens that allows us to see our times for what they really are. And that is where I am going to bring this to a close. It's been lovely to spend some time with you. It's been lovely not to watch a programme about murders downstairs. I am now going to wrap up, and I'm going to go and watch Taskmaster, because that's what happens on Thursday evenings, is to watch incredibly low stakes people trying to commit incredibly stupid tasks, such as, for example, being able to blindfold do a hole-in-one golf. That's the kind of level my brain sometimes goes to. And then other times my brain focuses like laser precision on a certain thing, goes, you really need to obsess about Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars album from 1972 today. And I must admit, that's what I did. Sorry guys, no one's perfect. Just wait until I get to Tin Machine. Anyway, stay beautiful. I will post links to various things in the comments, and I will see you all again soon. Thank you, and see you soon. Bye.